What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my official prediction on the Week 0 college football matchup between the Iowa State Cyclones and the Kansas State Wildcats. Big game, of course, coming up tomorrow afternoon, the first ever official college football game. We got other games coming up, but I think this is the first official college football game that starts early this afternoon. And yeah, I'll get to that time in just a moment, but yeah, big matchup here, a Big 12 game to open up the season of the 2025 season, and of course it will be in Dublin, Ireland. So yeah, who is ready for college football starting up tomorrow? Again, other games coming up, but this is definitely the biggest one coming up in Week 0, and the big weekend doesn't really start till next weekend, but I'm going to give you my prediction for this game, give you a preview of this game and see who the favorite is, and then I'll show you these two teams, their stats from last year, and then I'll give you my official prediction of what I think the score will be. Not really thinking the score is really important. It's really about who you're going to pick to win this game. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let's get into my prediction here for this Week 0 college football matchup, again, between Iowa State and Kansas State. So again, this game will be at noon Eastern time coming up tomorrow afternoon. It's early tomorrow afternoon, but down there, it's a different time zone. It's kind of like close to dark and everything, but still, noon Eastern time on ESPN. Again, the game will be in Dublin, Ireland. Spread going in favor of the Wildcats here by 3, also by a field goal if you like to call that. So yeah, I'm not really surprised that Kansas State is favored here in this one, and the over and under is at 51.5. I think earlier in the week, I think it was at 49.5, but it's been pretty much right around that high 40 range, and then also that low 50 range. So yeah, you could tell that, according to the odds from the over and under, the odds would say the outcome of the game will be probably a low-scoring game, which I could see it playing out that way, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this one probably goes into a shootout, because you look at both of these teams, the storylines going into this game, they're both ranked in the top 25, and this is also a Big 12 conference opener to kick off the season, so it's kind of like that early season kind of feel here to the season, and then also kind of an early conference feel, if that does make sense. But you look at these two teams, they both returned their starting quarterbacks from last year. For Iowa State, you got Rocco Beck returning for the Cyclones, and then for the Wildcats, you got Avery Johnson. So two very big quarterbacks maybe coming up this year in 2025. They both return here for these two teams. And these are also two really the more consistent programs in the Big 12. They're just well coached. They don't really have the talented roster and everything, but they can just really be well coached and also really compete with some of the highest teams in college football. So yeah, Iowa State is ranked number 22 in the preseason AP poll, while the Wildcats are sitting there at number 17. And again, I can see why the Wildcats are favored here. I really don't know really basically who the favorite would have been if I was going to be probably picking a favorite here. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Cyclones were favored, because that's a team that went to the Big 12 championship last year. But again, I'm not really surprised that the Wildcats are favored, but either way, the over and under is sitting at 51.5. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if this does turn out to be a low-scoring defensive battle, which I'll get to in just a little bit later on of how I think the game's going to go down. But yeah, high-scoring game, really, I think this is a game that's going to go either way. These rosters are just so even when you look at both sides of the football. But let's see what the matchup predictor is saying as well. So this is the matchup predictor, that pie chart that they use here on ESPN as well. I created my own pie chart just to make it make more sense. You look at the Wildcats, they are favored according to the matchup predictor. They favor the Wildcats, not by a big margin, but they give them about a 62.3% chance of winning this game, which, in my opinion, that's a pretty high percentage for a team, especially on a neutral field to win that, to win this game and everything. I think that's a pretty high percentage, giving the Wildcats a 62.3% chance of winning this game. And then on the other side for Iowa State, they give them about a 37.7% chance of beating Kansas State here in this one. So, yeah, not a very high percentage. When I look at these two percentages here for both teams, I think it's pretty even. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if one of these teams was at the 50-50 spot and then also like at the 40% spot. And yeah, I think it's really a close game. I think it really will be a close game. The matchup predictor is saying that maybe Kansas State probably wins by a touchdown. That's what the matchup predictor is saying to me. You know, I feel like when you got a 62.3% chance of winning this one, that's going to tell you that I think the Wildcats will probably win by a touchdown. And then on the other side, for Iowa State, they're like a touchdown underdog, somewhere around 6 or 7 points. But they would definitely give them a pretty good shot here to pull off the upset because, you know, the Wildcats are favored and they also are the highest ranked team. So yeah, odds would say that Iowa State definitely has a pretty good shot here to pull off the win. If they just had like a 20% or 10% a chance to doing that, I don't think they will have a chance in this game. But still, matchup predictor is saying Kansas State is favored here. They give them about a 62.3% chance of winning. And then for Iowa State, 37.7% chance of winning this game, and then also pulling off the upset since they are the underdog. Let's now get to the stats from last year in 2024 for both of these teams. We'll start with Iowa State first. So you look at the offensive side of the football last year for the Cyclones. Last year in points per game, they averaged about 31.1 points per game, which is a pretty solid number. You know, this is not an Iowa State offense that was not really explosive, but it was just consistent. It was well balanced on both sides of the football, and especially on defense as well. But you look at the total offensive yards per game last year, 416.2 yards of total offense, which is 39th in the country. So yeah, this was the 39th best offense in the country. Again, they're not an explosive offense, but still, they're just really well balanced and really well consistent, and that's why you see their number here at 39th. In passing yards per game, they averaged 255.7 yards of passing. That's also 39th in the country. So, yeah, Rocco Beck actually was a pretty solid quarterback last year for this Iowa State team. Rushing yards, though, per game, they were not really explosive there. This is more of a passing attack team, as I can tell here for the Cyclones. They averaged about 160.5 yards of rushing on the ground. That's 70th in the country, so they were not great there running the football, but it was still balanced enough, you know, to create like a really good offense to score some points. So yeah, that's not really a big weakness, but you know, according to that, it is a big weakness when we do the stats here for this team from last year on the offensive side of the football. Defensively for this team, they gave up 22.9 yards, or 22.9 points per game, I should say. That's not really a bad number there in my opinion. Still a decent amount, but either way, 353.9 yards of total offense given up. That was 51st on the defensive side of the football. So yeah, this was not a great defense at all, but you know, they were pretty solid. Let's just put it that way. This was a pretty solid defense that can, you know, stop teams on third down situations. And passing yards allowed, this was actually one of the top secondaries in the country. Look at that number, 165.6 yards of passing yards allowed. That's first in the country. So yeah, Iowa State was the top, you know, ranked passing attack defense in the country, and they were actually one of the top secondaries. So that's a great number there. Can that secondary do what it did last year? I don't know. We kind of need 5 weeks to kind of figure out what these teams are going to do throughout the rest of the season. And then rushing yards allowed, that was kind of the weakness here for Iowa State. They really couldn't stop the run that well. 188.4 yards of rushing on the ground given up, and that's 110th in the country. So although 51st on defense overall and then first in passing, they had a weakness on that defensive side of the football, and that was, of course, stopping the run. So that's the stats from last year for Iowa State in 2024. Let's now go on to Kansas State. Look at the offensive side of the football. In points per game, they averaged 30.8 points per game, which is pretty similar to Iowa State's. It's pretty close, but the Cyclones do have an advantage there. But in total offense, Kansas State has a big advantage there. They averaged 426.8 yards of total offense. That's 31st in the country. So, yeah, both offenses were inside just in that top 40, you know, for the total offense, and then also the offenses in the country. Passing yards per game for the Wildcats, they averaged 211.4 yards of passing, which is not great, but, you know, it's not really worse in my opinion. That's 85th in the country. So, yeah, that number has to really increase, I think, this year in order to, like, succeed with a balanced offense. But the running game was definitely the strength of this offense. They averaged 215.5 yards on the ground. That's 12th in the country. So that was definitely the biggest strength here for the Wildcats last year, running the football on the offensive side of the football. They do got some good running backs that can actually play some really good football. And then defensively for this team, In points per game, they allowed 23.4 points per game, which is pretty similar to the Cyclones. It's not really by a big margin, but the Cyclones do have an advantage there in points per game allowed. Total offense, though, or total defensive yards giving up, Kansas State has an advantage there. 343.4 yards of total offense, or total offense allowed. That's 43rd in the country. So this was the 43rd best defense. So not a great defense, but still a pretty solid defense nonetheless. And then passing yards allowed, that's where the weakness comes from here for the Wildcats. The secondary was the biggest weakness last year. 224.7 yards of passing allowed. That's 78th in the country. And then running against the run, they were actually pretty solid there. 118.7 yards of rushing on the ground allowed. That's 28th in the country. So again, the secondary was a big weakness last year for the Wildcats, while stopping the run was a pretty good strength for them. And then again, on offense, they were really good at running the football. So yeah, those two stats here, you look at these two stats, I think it's just pretty even, to be honest. Kansas State has an advantage in the total offense, but they also have an advantage in the total defensive yards allowed. So, but again, I think these two teams are just so even compared to last year. But let's now get into the prediction here for 2025 for this game. So again, it's Iowa State taking on Kansas State here in Dublin, Ireland. Again, this is the first game of the college football season of 2025. And I talked about this game being a Big 12 conference opener. I think the winner of this game is going to go on to have a chance to probably make it to the Big 12 championship, while the loser, they probably not have a really bad season, but they can still probably challenge for the Big 12 championship spot as well. Again, Iowa State made it to the Big 12 championship last year. Can they do that again in 2025? That's going to be kind of hard to do. And then for the Wildcats, Avery Johnson at quarterback, you kind of expect him to have a better season. You know, we saw the good Avery Johnson and then bad Avery Johnson from last year. You know, I think that's the case for both of these quarterbacks. We saw both quarterbacks have their ups and downs. And, you know, I talk about this game here being a pretty even matchup here. I just think the rosters are dead even. They're two well-coached teams. They can really play good football on both sides of the football. But like I said, I think it's going to come down to probably the quarterback position. I think whoever quarterback plays pretty well in this game, I think it's going to probably lead their team to victory. And I do trust Avery Johnson in that situation. So again, I picked Kansas State here to win in the preseason, but I'm still going to stick with my preseason pick. I'm going to go Wildcats here in this opener in Dublin, Ireland against the Iowa State Cyclones. I'm going with a score prediction of 23-20. So maybe it does come down to a game-winning field goal, maybe a game-winning drive, and then Kansas State takes the lead. Or it could be a tie ball game going maybe into, like, you know, force an overtime. Or either way, I think Kansas State probably could win by a game-winning field goal. But again, that's what my score prediction is going to come down to, 23-20. Again, I don't really feel confident with the score prediction. I only feel confident with my official team that I'm picking here to win this game. So I am going to go with Wildcats here to beat Iowa State, sticking with my preseason pick. Again, 23-20 is my final score prediction. So that's my official prediction for this Week 0 college football matchup between the Iowa State Cyclones and the Kansas State Wildcats. Who do you got winning this game? Let me know down in the comments below. Looking forward to this game tomorrow afternoon. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.